여러분 안녕하십니까, 돌돌콩입니다. 오늘은 굉장히 귀한 인터뷰를 한 편 준비를 했습니다. 미국의 브루킹스 연구소의 수석 연구원으로 계시는 조나탄 라우시 선생님을 인터뷰를 했는데요. 선생님의 책 The Happiness Curve가 이제 번역이 돼서 이번에 한국에서 출간이 된다고 해가지고 선생님과 1시간 정도 이 책에 관한 이야기를 나눴습니다. 한국어판 제목은 인생은 왜 50대부터 반등하는가? 사실 그게 원서 부제로 붙어 있거든요. Why Life Gets Better After 50라고 부제가 붙어 있는데 이게 번역이 돼가지고 한국어판 제목이 된 것 같아요. 책 제목이 인생은 왜 50부터 반등하는가 이다 보니까 저는 30대 중반인데 내가 읽었을 때 얻어갈 수 있는 건 어떤 게 있을까? 내가 공감할 만한 지점도 있을까? 라는 궁금증을 가지고 이제 책을 읽기 시작했어요. 책을 다 읽고 나니까 마음에 정말 생각보다 큰 울림이랄지 위로 같은 게 있어서 선생님과 이야기를 나눌 게 너무너무 기대가 되기 시작했어요. 그래서 인터뷰를 보시면 아시겠지만 인터뷰 초반에 특히 제가 굉장히 상기되어 있습니다. 선생님이 이런 책을 써주셔서 막 너무 감사하고 이러면서 약간 주접을 떨었는데 아주 따뜻하지만 똑똑한 멘토가 네가 겪고 있는 걸 나도 모르지 않아. 그런데 그게 좋아져. 그런 이야기를 해주시는데 그런데 그게 이제 듣고 그냥 좋으라고 해주시는 이야기가 아니라 굉장히 방대한 데이터와 그 데이터를 분석한 결과 그 다음에 이 인생 선배가 만난 수많은 사람들의 이야기 그리고 본인의 이야기까지 이렇게 곁들여서 해주시다 보니까 굉장히 탄탄하게 근거가 있는 이야기고 위로라는 생각이 들어서 마음의 울림과 깨달음과 굉장히 여운이 긴 위로 같은 게 남는 그런 독서 체험이었던 것 같아요. 이 책을 아주 간단하게 여러분들께 소개를 해드리면 이 책은 사람의 나이와 행복도, 우리가 얼마나 행복한가 그 둘 사이의 상관관계에 관한 이야기예요. 그래서 우리가 언뜻 생각을 해보면 우리가 한 10대부터 한 20대까지 쭉 체력도 좋고 막 뭐든지 해볼 수 있고 패기 넘치고 그런 시기까지 인생의 상승곡선을 쭉 그리다가 20대 후반 한 30대 초반까지 정점을 딱 찍고 거기서부터는 약간 내리막길을 타는 하얀 곡선을 그리는 그런 그림을 떠올리기가 쉽죠. 그래서 말하자면 사람의 나이를 X축에 놓고 행복들을 Y축에 넣으면 U자를 엎어놓은 듯한 그런 곡선이 되는 것처럼 생각하기가 쉬워요. 그런데 이 책이 하는 이야기는 사실은 그거를 정말 좀 자세하게 데이터로 그리고 인터뷰를 통해서 우리가 들여다봤더니 그 반대더라라는 이야기를 하는 거예요. 오히려 한 30대 후반, 40대 초중반까지는 좀 이렇게 힘들다가 50대를 기점으로 사실 그 최저점이 나라마다 다르기는 한데 대체로 50대를 기점으로 반등하면서 삶이 점점 더 행복해지고 좋아진다, 만족도가 높아진다라는 이야기를 하는 책입니다. 그래서 저는 이 책을 그런 분들께 추천을 해드리고 싶어요. 물론 50대, 60대 독자분들이 읽으셔도 좋겠지만 20대 후반, 30대, 그리고 40대를 살고 계신 분들 중에서 첫 번째, 내가 가진 거라고는 젊음이 전부였는데 이제 그것도 약간 시들해지는 것 같고 여기서부터는 어떡하지? 라는 어떤 나이 먹는 것에 대한 불안함을 가지고 계신 분들, 그 다음에 두 번째, 좋은 시절은 다 지나갔구나. 여기서부터는 쭉 내리막이겠구나. 무언가를 새로 시도해보고 굉장한 즐거움을 느끼기에는 이미 좀 늦었구나 라는 생각이 드시는 분들. 그리고 세 번째, 나는 나름 매일 하루하루를 열심히 살았는데 가끔 왜 나는 막 뭔가 다른 걸 해야 될 것 같고 인생을 낭비하는 것 같고 지금껏 내가 나름 열심히 해온 것들이 보잘것없이 느껴지지? 왜 가끔 한 번씩 이렇게 마음이 힘들지? 라고 느끼시는 분들께 이 책을 정말 진심으로 추천해드리고 싶어요. 조나탄 라우시 선생님에 대해서 또 간단하게 소개를 해드리면 지금은 브루킹스 연구소의 수석 연구원으로 계시고 디 아틀란틱의 또 개건 기자로 활동을 하고 계시고요. 아주 눈부신 커리어를 이어오신 분이십니다. 예일대를 졸업하시고 그 후에 아주 내노라 하는 그 곳에 기고를 많이 하셨어요. 월스트리트저널, 뉴욕타임즈, 워싱턴 포스트 이런 곳에서 기고를 하셨고 특히 2005년도에 내셔널 매거진 어워드 인터넷에 찾아보시면 그 잡지 업계, 매거진 업계에서는 퓰리처상에 버금가는 상이라는 이야기도 나오는데 내셔널 매거진 어워드 수상을 하신 분이십니다. 이 책의 시작이 또 굉장히 흥미로운데 토머스 콜의 그림 1842년도 작품입니다. 인생의 여로 The Voyage of Life에서 이 책이 시작을 해요. 사람의 삶을 4단계로 나눕니다. 유년, 청춘, 성년, 노년 이렇게 4단계로 나누고 그 각 단계를 그림으로 표현한 4점짜리 그림을 소개를 하는 데에서 이제 책이 시작을 합니다. 먼저 유년을 살펴보면 일단 그림 자체가 굉장히 희망찹니다. 아기가 이렇게 막 기뻐하고 있고 그 뒤에서 수호천사, 약간 부모님 같은 존재인 거죠. 수호천사가 딱 지켜주고 있어요. 그리고 보시면 강물이 유유히 흐르고 그 잔잔한 강물을 따라서 배가 앞으로 천천히 나아가고 있는 모습이 이렇게 형상화가 되어 있습니다. 배가 나아가는 그 방향도 보면은 꽃이 막 만발해 있어요. 그래서 보면은 굉장히 기분이 좋아지고 희망을 느낄 수 있는 그런 그림이에요. 이게 유년이고 요 뒤에 따라오는 그림이 청춘입니다. 보면은 아주 황홀하죠. 저 멀리에 보면은 공중에 아주 웅장한 성이 이렇게 딱 떠 있습니다. 그리고 이 여행자는 그 천공의 성을 향해서 정말 간절하게 손을 뻗고 있죠. 저기에 내가 도달하고 말리라 라는 어떤 패기, 간절함이 느껴지는데 근데 이 그림을 조금 더 자세히 보시면 굉장히 재밌습니다. 이 여행자의 눈에는 보이지 않는 게 그림을 보는 우리의 시선에는 보이거든요. 이 천공의 성에 도달을 하려면 그 흙길, 가지 않은 길이겠죠. 그 흙길을 밟아가지고 가야 되는데 사실 강물은 그 흙길을 비껴가요. 이렇게 보면은 이 여행자는 그 성으로 향하는 길을 발견을 못했을 수도 있고 발견을 했다 하더라도 그 운명의 강물이 나를 이끄는 쪽으로 자연스럽게 이렇게 흘러 갈 수도 있겠죠. 하지만 전체적으로는 역시 그림이 굉장히 힘차고 그림에서 희망, 포부 같은 게 느껴지는 그림이에요. 이게 청춘이고 그리고 요 뒤에 따라오는 그림이 재밌습니다. 그게 성년인데요. 이 책에서 또 굉장히 주목하고 있는 그림이기도 해요. 조나탄 라우시 선생님이 이 책이 나오고 나서 이제 강연을 다니시면서 이 그림에 대해서 하나하나 설명을 해주시는데 이 성년 그림이 딱 나오면 사람들이 막 다 박장대소를 하면서 웃거든요.
Here's midlife. This is midlife. This
일단 그림 자체가 굉장히 음울합니다. 칙칙하죠. 보면은 바위들이 막 삐죽삐죽하게 솟아있고 배는 완전히 급류에 휩쓸려가지고 막 협곡을 향해 가는데 자세히 보시면 배의 키도 날아가서 이 여행자는 배에 대한 통제가 전혀 안 되는 상황이에요. 그리고 손을 모으고 기도를 하고 있죠. 눈이 그 정말 처절한 불안한 눈빛으로 막 하늘을 향해서 기도를 하고 있고 근데 배는 막 걷잡을 수 없이 급류를 타고 협곡으로 치닫는 막 그런 그림이죠. 마지막이 이제 노년입니다. 전체적인 그림의 색조는 굉장히 어둡지만 물살이 많이 잦아들고 어떤 평안함, 평온함 같은 것들이 느껴지는 그림이죠. 그런데 책도 이 성년 그림에 굉장히 많이 집중을 하고 저도 성년의 그림에 굉장히 관심이 많이 가더라고요. 왜냐면 그 급물살을 저도 막 타는 그런 시기이다 보니까 거기에 많이 집중을 하게 됐는데 이 성년기에 대한 묘사를 또 조나탄 라우시 선생님이 굉장히 담담하지만 막 마음에 확확 와닿게 하십니다. 이런 부분이 있어요. 내가 이루지 못한 것에 대한 미련이 아무리 떨쳐내려고 해도 끈질기게 달라붙었다. 눈을 뜨는 순간 머릿속에서 볼멘 소리가 들렸다. 넌 인생을 낭비하고 있어. 요 몇 년 동안 번듯하게 이룬 게 없잖아. 다른 곳으로 가서 뭐가 됐든 다른 일을 해야 해. 회사가 됐든 뭐가 됐든 리더로서 조직을 이끌고 있는 것도 아니고. 이렇게 머릿속을 윙윙대는 자책 중 대다수가 명백히 말이 안 되는 소리였기에 나는 더 혼란스러웠다. 그리고 내 의지와 상관없는 타인과의 비교 역시 억누르려야 억누를 수가 없었다 라는 묘사가 나오거든요. 일단 우리가 왜 이렇게 힘든 성년기를 보내는가에 관한 이야기를 차근차근 이제 조나탄 라우시 선생님이 해주십니다. 그 후에 우리가 그걸 이제 이해를 하고 나면 인생이 50대부터 반등한다고 했는데 어떤 메커니즘을 통해서 우리가 조금씩 더 행복해지는가 어떤 것들이 우리를 만족감 있는 인생으로 데려가는가에 관한 이야기를 또 차근차근 해주십니다. 그래서 읽고 나면은 나이 먹는 것에 대해서 좀 선입견을 살짝 내려놓고 좀 건강한 가치관, 마음가짐을 가질 수 있도록 실질적으로 마음에 남는 메시지를 주는 책이라는 생각이 들었어요. 조나탄 라우시 선생님과의 인터뷰도 재미있게 봐주셨으면 좋겠습니다.
Before we jumpstart talking about the book, I just wanted to say Thank you so much for writing such an amazing book. I was reading it and then, I was so excited. I was excited to the level that I really wanted to look at Korean data specifically to, kind of get deeper understanding about what's happening there with the happiness level and things like that. But a lot of amazing research, amazing data in all this like papers, and also your description about not depression but like dissatisfaction and all those things that I'm also currently going through. It was just so helpful and I learned a lot. I feel like this is one of those books that I'll keep on my bookshelf and probably I'll come back occasionally, time to time. So I learned a lot this time, but I think if I read it in my 40s, I think there will be different takeaways. If I read it in my 50s, there will be different takeaways. So I'll keep it close, and I highlighted a lot, but I know that different parts will resonate with me when I'm in older ages. So thank you so much for your work, and I really hope that a lot of Korean readers get to know about this book.
Well, thank you. I'm very happy to be with you, and I'm happy in these times to have a book that's so full of positive news.
Let's get started. So because this book is about happiness across the lifespan, and usually I want to know a little more about the author's personal story. So I want to learn more about you. So how was your life in your teenage years, 20s, 30s, and 40s and 50s? As far as I know, you're in your 60s right now. So I want to know more about what was happening to you on each stage of your life. And if possible, if you are comfortable with that, you did a lot of this happiness rating using Cantor's letters. So I want to do this with you. So if you can rate your happiness level on each stage, I want to learn more about that.
Well, thank you. My life story starts in Phoenix, Arizona, which is a small city at that point in 1960 in the southwestern United States in the desert. I went to both initially private and then public schools in Phoenix, and I was very ambitious to get out of Phoenix. It seemed like too small a town, and I set some big goals for myself. So I was someone who got into my first choice college and did well and began a career in journalism. I dreamed of writing books someday in my 20s, and by my early 30s, I had started publishing books. I dreamed of being a columnist and writing about politics and managed to do that. I dreamed of changing the world and got involved in the gay rights movement. I'm gay, I'm married now and live in Washington, D.C. And that worked out too. So I was one of those fortunate people who by my late 30s was just exceeding all my high ambitions. Yet somehow I didn't feel as satisfied as I expected. I felt almost disappointed, and I didn't understand why. And that began in my 30s, and it got worse into my 40s. And, I knew it wasn't a crisis because I was okay with my life. I was not seriously depressed, but I also thought maybe there was something wrong with me. And then going through that experience and coming out of it is what led me to write The Happiness Curve.
For many people, research is actually me-search. So they kind of do the research to get to know more about themselves.
Love that phrase, me-search.
Yes, yeah. So I see a lot of researchers actually do the me-search. So is that your story too? Can we say?
Well, it's kind of my story. Yeah, I was very disoriented in my 40s by what was happening because objectively I was doing so well. I won the highest prize in my business, the National Magazine Award. The National Magazine Award when I was 45. And that seemed extremely satisfying for about 10 days. And then this strange dissatisfaction came back, and I would wake up in the morning with these almost voices telling me, got to change everything, you're wasting your life, time is running out, which I knew was irrational. So a few years later, that fog of disappointment began to lift, even though at that point things started going downhill. Both of my parents died and my job went away and I tried a business and that failed. Yet this sense of disappointment was actually receding. At the same time, I discovered an economist at Brookings, where I work, who was working on global happiness data from around the world and doing what you do. She was running the statistics. And she told me about this strange finding that all over the world, there's an independent relationship between age and happiness. Economists, oddly, were finding it first, not psychologists, and it looks like this. I don't know which way you're oriented. I guess from your point of view, it looks like that.
It's
And
a
this
U-shaped
dip,
curve, so.
It's a U-shaped curve.
Mm-hmm.
Life satisfaction, not mood, not happiness. So it's not like how cheerful are you today? How many times did you smile? It's how satisfied are you with your life as a whole? It's evaluative happiness, something different. And it bottoms out right at the age when I bottomed out. In fact, I learned that I had discovered this curve, that I had lived through this curve almost textbook way. And that's when I said, I've got to write about this. People need to know about this, that if you're going through a malaise in midlife, there's nothing wrong with you. It's a natural phenomenon, and it seems to be something that goes on independent of our conditions in life. It's not the only thing going on. So, you know, if you win a Nobel Prize or you get a cancer diagnosis, that'll affect your happiness too. But it's one of the most important things happening.
If that's the case, what would you say the opposite of happiness in this context?
A sense of restlessness, discontent, wanting more. Sometimes you're not sure what that more is, but you know you want more. Sometimes, in my case, it got more complicated, as it does for many people, even most people, because not only was I feeling disappointed in my life, I knew there was no reason to feel disappointed in my life. So I also felt disappointed in myself, because I had everything to be grateful for, yet I wasn't feeling grateful. And that made me feel like, okay, I'm a grouchy, ungrateful person. I don't even like myself. If this is how I'm going to be, have so much to be happy about, yet not feel grateful and satisfied. So it begins to spiral, because sense of dissatisfaction with your life leads to dissatisfaction with yourself, leads to more dissatisfaction with your life, becomes like a dog chasing its tail. And this is all science, by the way. It didn't just happen to me. Some people have worked out the equations of how this can become a really self-fulfilling cycle that can be quite hard to break out of.
I call it meta unhappiness. You are unhappy for some reason, and then you are unhappy that you are unhappy with all this thing that you already have, and you're not grateful. So it's kind of hard. Yeah, it's endless from here.
Well, and that's why I wrote the book, when I realized that what I was going through was normal and natural and in fact healthy, because it leads to a positive result, though it's annoying to go through. I realized there are a lot of people out there suffering because they feel there's something wrong with them. It's not fun, but nothing wrong with you. That takes out that whole second burden of, oh, thank goodness. I guess I'm all right. I guess this will pass.
The book was really normalizing that stage, that hard stage, and I really like the part that you didn't call it crisis. It's a healthy transition, so you shouldn't feel any shame about it. We should normalize it more. So that part resonated with me a lot. I mean, I feel the same. There is this huge shame in talking about unhappiness, I think. Whenever I say, I think I'm unhappy, my family or my friends, their reaction is one of two. One is like, is there anything going wrong? Like, what's wrong? And another one is like, you should be more grateful. You are just simply not grateful for what you have. You have a job, you have family, like you are healthy. What else are you asking for more there? So
it's all exactly right. There's actually a third layer here, which is because I felt ashamed of myself for not feeling as grateful as I did. I didn't tell anyone how I was feeling. I didn't even tell my husband. So I was letting myself get isolated. And that's the worst thing you can do in this situation, because midlife transition is not a do it yourself situation. We need help and support of others. The phenomenon, the transition itself, is a natural phenomenon and doesn't happen to everyone. Your mileage will vary. Human beings are not identical, but it's a very common pattern. People are most likely to feel it ironically if things in their life are going well. Because remember, your life satisfaction is made up of a lot of variables, like your life circumstances. Are you rich or poor? What is your health? And your basic emotional set point. Are you depression prone or anxiety prone? Are you meeting your goals in life? So all of those things go into it. And if you're having a lot of severe setbacks in your 40s, you may not even notice the underlying U curve because there's so much else going on. But if you're someone like me and everything's going very smoothly, and you know you have no reason to be unhappy, and you feel yourself sliding down this U curve as you enter your 40s and continue downward, you feel it very intensely because it's the main thing that's going on in terms of your life satisfaction. And of course, we're going back to these spirals, these wheels within wheels, but the very fact that this strikes often high-achieving people with the most to be grateful for makes it harder for those people because they're high-achieving and have the most to be grateful for. So we can chuckle about this, but it's almost diabolical how this works. But it does turn out that if you can ease people's anxiety about it and say, you know what, this has nothing to do or very little to do with any mistakes or decisions you're making. It's just a natural thing. Then that helps reduce those spirals downward.
And knowing that it will get better in the end, the last sentence of this book is my favorite one. You said that it's worth waiting. And I just like highlight it. I like it so much. And, you know, you can communicate about how you feel with your friend in the similar ages, but also you can communicate with your mentor or people who've been through that stage already, like you, right? And then they will give you insight. It will get better. And then you can talk about it freely. And then you know that this is not the end of your life or your world, and it will eventually get better, and then you can just wait, and then it will pass, and that just helps tremendously.
And there's a payoff. This is all going on. There are reasons it's happening. Now, we're not totally sure of those. We're much sure of the what than the why. But there's a payoff. And that's when you come out the other side, you find, well, we can talk about the payoff, but you actually find as you age out of your 50s and beyond, it gets easier and easier to feel satisfied with life. It's like the spiral begins to reverse, and suddenly you're expecting, because we tell ourselves that after midlife, you know, it's all downhill, we just decay and decline and retire, go out to pasture and die, but that's not true at all. We're pleasantly surprised. What was a cycle of annual disappointment because I'm not as satisfied as I thought I'd be despite my high achievement in my 40s turns into a reverse cycle of I'm more satisfied than I expected to be because in my 60s I'm doing more than I expected, and the U-curve is on the upswing. So now it's actually helping me feel satisfied. It's amplifying satisfaction. So once you've made that transition, most people, the vast majority, including the ones I talked to in my book, say there is no way that they would trade what they have in their 60s and 70s to be young again. Because it's so rewarding, and that's really, I'm 61, and so far, that's been exactly the case for me.
You wouldn't go back to your 20s or
No.
No, that was a hard no.
So what seems to be going on here, Sunny, we can talk about it if you think the time is right. Is sort of what seems to be happening here, and it's a mixture of things. We know that part of this is probably wired in because the happiness U-curve has been found not only in humans but also in chimps and orangutans, our closest relatives. And there are interesting ways to measure life satisfaction in chimps and orangutans, but it can be done and it shows the same pattern. So something is going on that's very natural. But we also know there's a social element because the shape of the U-curve differs in different countries. And where it bottoms out, what age you start to turn around, also differs by different countries. So there's a social element too, and they're somehow interacting. But I think what's going on, the best evidence is that it's three vectors operating at once. The first is realignment. We start out life with high ambitions and thinking if I just get that one job, I'll be happy. But we're ambitious. Ambition moves the goalposts. So you get that job and then you want another job. You get the house, you want a better house. So you do this year after year, you meet your goals, yet you're not as excited, as rewarded as you expect. And by 20 years of that, you get very pessimistic. You start thinking, you know what? My expectations were all wrong. I'm never going to get the rewards I thought I would spiritually and emotionally from what I'm accomplishing. You get pessimistic and gloomy. But oddly, that helps reset your expectations. They become lower. And that helps you. It turns you around. Because now you're starting to feel, wait a minute, once my expectations are more realistic in life, then those things that you achieve become more valued. So that's the first thing that happens, a realignment. Second is a revaluing. As we get to middle age and beyond, we realize we don't have as many years left. And we begin revaluing our priorities. We begin thinking, well, I'm going to invest less in status, competition, building social capital for the future. I'm going to invest more in the people and pursuits that I really care most about, especially the relationships I care most about. Building the relationships, giving back to my community, leaving a legacy, helping young people, investing in family. Well, it turns out that really is a source of deep satisfaction, and it does not suffer in the same way that social ambition does, because it doesn't always reset. The more you achieve, the more you want. So the more we shift our values to those relationships, the more satisfied we feel, and we're more inclined to do that as we get older. And then the third thing is the simplest to explain, maybe also the weirdest. Our brains change as we age.
Ooh.
Older people experience less stress in a given situation. They don't have increased depression. They have less depression. They have less anxiety. They still have strong emotions, but their volatility does not last as long. And there's this thing called the positivity effect. So you take people, you put them in MRI machines, you look at their brain activity, take them at different ages, and show them negative things and positive things, images. The young people will respond relatively more to the negative things. The older people will respond relatively more to the positive things. So our brains are actually changing in ways that make us more receptive to the sweet in life and less receptive to the sour. And all of those things are going on this time scale across life, and they add up to this. But the good news that people just don't realize, this is, to me, the most surprising discovery of the book. We have aging exactly backwards. We think it's just going to be decline and despair and dismay and depression.
Right.
It's the opposite of that. The aging process actually helps us savor the good things in life. And that goes right through until we die, all the way through into the 90s. Doesn't mean everyone will be happy all the time. Obviously, if you're battling cancer, it's going to be hard. But this curve is going to help you. It's going to be a wind at your back emotionally as you age.
So actually one of the biggest question that I had was because I am in my 30s and I'm kind of running toward the rock bottom of this U-shaped curve, I think, and a little bit terrified. And I was like thinking, is there any way to work around that rock bottom, right? Because I'm scared, right? But are you saying that hard period, that hard middle age period is necessary to become happier in the later stage of our life? No, it's not necessary.
Not everyone goes through it. A lot of people do. There's a ton of data on this, and I also interviewed a lot of people. But yeah, some people just don't feel it. Whether that's because of other things that are going on in their life that are more prominent and kind of swamp the happiness curve effect, or just because people are different. So your mileage will vary. You shouldn't assume anything. But just knowing what you know will mean that if you hit your late 30s and you start to feel this weird sense of discontent, two things. First, you won't panic. You'll know that it's totally natural, probably good for you. And the second thing is you'll be willing to tell people about it and talk to people about it, and you'll be less likely to make dumb mistakes, like thinking if you just, change your whole life up in some random way that it's going to solve the problem. So you'll be more immune than you otherwise would have been. Now, that said, for people, I think like me, who just experienced a very pronounced case of the natural curve, the only way out is through. But it's not that bad. It's not like you get up every day, you feel depressed and awful. It's a background thing. It's not a mood disorder. It's a contentment disorder.
Yeah, that discontentment, I really love this term because I asked my husband many times, I remember, do you think I'm depressed? Because I didn't feel like happy. And I was thinking, something was going wrong, and I thought it was a depression. So I asked my husband many, many times, and he said, "No, you are not depressed. So why do you keep asking this question to me?" But I was like, then what's going on with me? I don't feel unhappy. And then discontentment was it, I think. So it just answered my question. That was what's going on, and I should handle this, I think, to be to feel actually happier, probably. I'm gonna ask you about how the money fits in. We know from the research that from certain points, increase in your income doesn't make you happier, right? In your experience, was that really true?
It gave me more security, but yeah, it so quickly becomes part of your happiness baseline that, yeah, it's really not a satisfying thing. It's, you don't want to be poor, that's for sure. You want to have security and know you're not going to lose your home, have to live on the street. So that's very important for security. But in terms of life satisfaction, if you get that second house, that bigger car, you just almost immediately, that becomes part of the background of your life. And you just go on to wanting the next thing. In some cases, money makes people less happy. Money is not a very good proxy for happiness.
It seems like this U-shaped curve appears in many, many countries,
Including South Korea, by the way.
including South Korea. Do you think that shape will still be there for the future generation? The reason why I'm asking
yeah,
this
I think so.
question, yeah, you think so?
I mean, it's there for chimps and orangutans. So this seems to be pretty deeply wired. Now, generational experience matters, and that might change the shape of it, may raise the level of the curve higher or lower. Like you can have two countries with the same U shape, but one can be up here and one can be down here, because the first country just has a general level of happiness than higher. Scandinavian countries are up here. So those things will always matter, and generational experience will always matter. My father grew up in the Depression, and it scarred him for life. So all of those things matter, but I think now, since we see that the U-shaped curve seems to be almost universal, it's found in most countries around the world, as well as other species. I don't think it's going away. One professor I talked to about it believes this is a once-in-a-century discovery about human nature.
So yeah, I was gonna ask about like cohort effects here. Actually, this question was the one that I got from different person who read this book with me. He was curious whether this MZ generation in Korea, so MZ generation is millennials plus Gen Z. So these are people who were born between like 1980s and early 2000. And what's special about this birth cohort is they experience pandemic and economic crisis entering into their early adulthood. So, that kind of cohort effect, in theory, could affect their life for the rest of their life, right? Changing their behavior, values, lifestyle, presumably approach to their life and happiness. So I was curious if that kind of strong cohort effect could somewhat subvert the shape of curve or change the pattern of this curve, but you think this U-shape will still appear in the future generation?
I think the U-shape will appear, but the shape, the specific trajectory may change, where it bottoms out, for example. I mean, just for example, one of the things we know is that, remember we talked about countries where the U-curve is high, countries where it's lower, because just the average level of happiness across life is higher in Scandinavia than in Eastern Europe. Well, it also turns out that countries that have the higher band of happiness also bottom out on the U-curve earlier. So they have more years of improvement. And then the lower a country gets, the more poor it gets, the later this turnaround happens. So they're spending more years on the downslope, on the unhappy side of the curve. So things like that could change depending on situation and depending on the level of wealth in a country, the level of health. So how will the pandemic and other conditions affect it? I don't know. South Korea is an interesting country because it has been so transformed in living memory. I just looked it up this morning. Average life expectancy at birth went up 30 years since 1960. And so that's going to be hard for the next generation to live up to, that kind of game. But there is good news for them. This is the big good news element of my book overall, which I always try to emphasize. OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, is projecting that between now and 2055 or 2060, South Koreans will, once they get to age 65, their life expectancy will grow from about 20 years, living to almost age 85, to 25 years, living to almost age 90. So 5 additional years for adults over the next few decades. And think about that. Remember, those additional years are on the upswing of the happiness curve. And for most people, they're going to be healthy years because medical care is getting so much better.
Right.
So they'll get the gift of probably 5 additional years of life in the most satisfying pro-social time of life. I mean, this is the greatest gift imaginable.
You know, what you said was very hopeful, but it's true that suicide rates and depression rates and poverty level, they're all high. It remains just so high in South Korea among elderly people. So I'm still a little bit concerned that they really live a happy life and they're really experiencing that upward happiness curve.
Always have to remind people that the U-shaped curve is not the only thing going on. There's lots of other things that also determine your evaluation of your life. And so it's the sum of all of those things. The important thing to realize is not that the U-curve guarantees that someone will be satisfied with their life at age 70. Nothing could do that. What it does do is say that at age 70, unlike age 30, the wind is at your back. Or to change metaphors, you're floating with the current instead of pushing against the current. So that other things being equal, it's easier to be happy in late adulthood than it is in youth. And also what happens is that this upswing in the U-curve actually provides some degree of buffer against setbacks in life. Things that would seem crushing when we're younger seem easier to cope with when we're older. And partly that's the perspective of age, but partly it's these changes in the brain toward positivity. So it's not guaranteeing that your parents or anyone feel great or feel satisfied. I mean, people retire, they don't know what to do with themselves. Their friends pass away, they feel unhappy. Maybe they're not getting along with their kids. There are a million things that affect this. But most of them will be easier to cope with later in life. And the aging process will probably help you to accentuate the positive in life and to focus on the things in life that are most important. They help you. They don't solve the problem, but they help you.
Yeah, you talk about this wisdom in the book, and you really kind of describe really well what wisdom is and how that works, and really like that. I wanted to share that with my mom, and I'll go to Korea next month and I'll just read it through with my mom together, and hopefully that helps her. Yeah, that was what I was thinking. Yeah.
I love that idea. One of the things that we need to do, certainly in the US, but I think probably South Korea and elsewhere, is that we have this, our society is based on an outdated notion of aging. It's based on a notion where maybe we live to be 70 years old. So we do all our education at the front end of life in the first, 20 years or so. And then we do all our work in the middle until we're about 65. And then boom, we hit this cliff. It's called retirement. Suddenly you're doing nothing all day. And your talents and energies are being wasted. Well, now we live in a world where in South Korea people are living to 85. They're healthy most of that time. Same's true in America. They don't want to just do the same thing their whole working life and then do nothing and then die. They want to use these additional years of life and their life experience and their frame of mind, which is oriented toward giving back to their communities and families and their loved ones. They want to use that time. So what we need to do is get out of the model where you just work until you stop working and move toward a model where we have off-ramps, where people as they age through can shift to jobs that are less oriented about getting the next promotion and working 60 hours a week super hard, so that you can ease into different jobs that are more oriented toward training and mentoring, human relations, and where you can still work, but maybe work less hours and have more time, which you can then devote to volunteering, family, your church, whatever you want to do. So this should be a ramp, not a cliff. And that's one of a lot of changes that we need to make. Another is educational. People don't want to stop learning after age 20 and do the same thing forever. So we need to have things like gap years for people in their 50s who are saying it's time to realign my life. That's a natural thing to do in your 40s and 50s. Your values have changed, so your life needs to change. Well, you need help making those good decisions. So we need to make sure that people have access to the counseling and social support that they need to make those transitions. And a lot of people want to go back to school, learn new things, try new ventures. We have to make that easy. So once you understand the U curve and this additional gift of all these extra years, we need to use that gift. We need to not throw it away. And that means getting rid of the notion that basically life is work until you die.
Lee, do you have anything that you'd like to say to Korean readers?
Well, it seems like a universal phenomenon, but I would love to hear from people in Korea about their own experiences, about how this applies to their life. I have not had the opportunity to visit South Korea, and I'd love to. It is an amazing country. I have a nephew who is living in South Korea right now. He's a total crazy fan of K-pop, which is taking the world by storm over here. I would love to know how these ideas, how this book resonates. Yeah. Well, maybe I'll hear from some people. And the book also has a chapter that's prescriptive for individuals about if you're encountering a midlife malaise, some things you can do to get through it. The most important is to wait it out, but there are also some other important things. And people can read the book and find out what those are. I won't spoil them. And there's also a chapter on what countries, societies can do to rewire themselves so that they can take advantage of this transition and make it easier for people instead of harder. And there's also a chapter which I think a lot of people in Asia will appreciate on wisdom. And
I love that chapter so much.
yeah, it's my favorite chapter too. Wisdom is a real thing. There's a whole science now devoted to understanding wisdom. It's not the same as experience or skill or intelligence or knowledge. It's its own thing. The ancient sages were right about that. And the thing about wisdom is it not only helps your own life satisfaction, it helps the life satisfaction of everyone around you. And it makes societies stronger too. So I think that's a message which I think in South Korea might have some real resonance.